All right, we're ready.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the July 26th Program Advisory Committee meeting. I'd like to note that we are starting the meeting at 4:05. Just a reminder, the meeting is being streamed live on NVTC's YouTube page. Staff have confirmed a quorum. I have a nod on that. And we're going to start with Mr. Snyder's request to participate electronically. He's in New York due to travel. Following our updated electronic participation policy, we will take action to approve those members needing to participate electronically. Could I please have a motion to approve Mr. Snyder's participation by electronic means?
So moved.
Is there a second? Any further discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Welcome, Mr. Snyder.
Thank you very much.
As part of today's meeting materials, we were provided a summary of the April 20th PAC meeting. Does anyone have any comments to share with staff about those notes? Mr. Snyder?
No comments. Thank you.
All right. Hearing none, the committee accepts the summary. Moving on to item 3 on our agenda is the commuter choice program. Last month, the commissions and CTB approved the largest commuter choice program of projects to date for the I-395-95 corridor and the program. Now we are shifting over to the I-66 corridor. Adam Hager from our community choice team is here to give us more information about the next call for projects for the I-66 commuter choice project. Adam, please take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Today we have a quick recap of the Commuter Choice Program and an update on our I-66 FY25-26 call for projects. So first of all, a little bit of background. Commuter Choice, of course, is our grant program here at MVTC where we reinvest a portion of toll revenues from I-66, I-395-95 to transit and other transportation improvements that benefit toll payers by moving more people more efficiently through the corridors by expanding options for commuters. The I-66 program is administered solely by us here at MVTC and has been around since 2017. We do have long-term agreements with the Commonwealth that spell out funding for both corridors, and for I-66, we normally see about $30 million per 2-year program, which is comprised of I-66 inside the Beltway toll revenues and I-66 outside the Beltway concessionaire funding. So moving into our I-66 FY25-26 funding cycle, this year, we are expecting at least $40 million available for new projects, which is the largest amount available in any round to date. So we're excited about that. Of that amount, we're anticipating that up to 50% can be used for transit operations. Our agreement with the Commonwealth stipulates that no more than 50% of revenues transferred to MVTC over a 9-year period can support transit operations costs. We do define this narrowly. This is basically fuel, oil, driver salaries, dispatcher salaries, and fringe benefits. We stayed well below this threshold in prior rounds, which gives us a little bit more flexibility this time around. We are also working with VDOT on toll revenue projections, and we'll have a firmer estimate before the commission opens a call for projects. But for now, we are advertising that $40 million figure. A couple other items of note for this upcoming funding round. We are not proposing any major policy changes this year, but there are a few small clarifications that we're making in our recipient handbook, things like a couple updates to our application form, clarifying how we score certain measures, that sort of thing. The only change in how we administer the program is we are looking to bump up the application window by a month to open the call for projects in October rather than the usual November. This will give us more time for program development in the spring, which will be needed. Speaking of the schedule on the next slide, as far as the next few months, we'll brief the commission in September and continue to engage with eligible applicants, including via an overview webinar toward the end of that month. In October, we'll open the call for projects shortly after the commission meeting, and then have workshops, basically to go over project ideas, the application form, that sort of thing, give them a chance to ask questions. Program. Applications will then be due in December prior to the holidays. We'll sort of go on pause for a couple weeks there. And then moving into program development on the next slide here in the spring, once the application window closes, we begin program development. And that concludes in June with approval of program projects. In January, we get started by reviewing all submitted applications for eligibility, working with URPT, and we'll notify any applicants with ineligible projects. The key component that we look for, of course, is whether the project will benefit toll payers. So effectively, does this move more people more efficiently through that I-66 and 7 corridor? Then we'll score the eligible applications using the same technical evaluation process as this past year for I-395 commuter choice. There's a heavy emphasis, of course, on technical merit, which is 75% of a project score, as well as cost effectiveness at 20% and applicant preference at 5%. In April, we'll open a 1-month public comment period where the public can provide input on all eligible applications. We also expect to convene this group again in April to consider and endorse a draft program of projects for the full commission to consider. Beyond that, in May, we'll brief the commission and close public comment and work with the RPT to determine how we might best engage the CTB and or its rail and transit subcommittee. Finally, in June, the commission will act to adopt a program and refer it to the Commonwealth Transportation Board, which will approve the projects as part of its 6-year improvement program at that time. Happy to take any questions.
I have a few questions if I could jump in. I'm curious, we've been talking about the drop in like metro ridership and VRE ridership, things like that, people not going to work every day of the week. So I'm curious what sort of impacts on toll usage, because you said it's the largest pool yet, which sort of implies people are still driving, but what's the trend? What's the expectation? Any sort of insight on that?
It's a good and timely question. We are starting to work on the annual report for FY23, and what we found is that really traffic congestion is up. So traffic volumes are up across the region. That has also led to toll revenues going back up. So inside the Beltway, revenues are going back up, and that's part of why we can advertise that $40 million figure for new projects. We're also finding that because of that, there's a lot more usage and ridership on projects that we support in Commuter Choice. So we don't have a finalized number yet, but we are thinking that this is a record year in FY23 for ridership across Commuter Choice projects. Okay,
and I guess my related concern and curiosity is sometimes we fund things at the front and rely on future, we fund a startup or investigation, and then if these funds start to go down because people aren't driving and tolls go down, do the projects have trouble, moving forward in subsequent applications? But it doesn't sound like that's a real concern.
That really hasn't been the case. I mean, we do have pretty strict timeframes with when funds that we award have to be obligated and expended. So anything that we award has to be expended within 5 years from the date of award. So folks are kind of on the clock from day one to make sure things get implemented, that transit service that we fund gets on the street. So we really haven't seen that be much of an issue. We also only program funds 2 years out at a time. So with this upcoming funding round, we're only looking at fiscal years 25 and 26, and we've taken a pretty conservative, cautious approach with the amount that we're allocating basically during the pandemic. So over the past couple I-66 rounds, when toll revenues were kind of up in the air, we were really conservative with our approach, which has really helped us out at this point.
Okay, and my last question, if y'all don't mind, is I keep asking this every time these programs come up, that the toll payer benefit is defined with basically moving cars. But how do we keep poking at that to talk about things like, the reduction of emissions is beneficial to a toll payer, to their air quality, or safety, the elimination of traffic accidents is a benefit to the toll payer? Is there mechanisms to keep poking at that?
I'll see if Alan wants to maybe add anything, but in short, what we have found based on Virginia legal precedent is that there has to be a particularized benefit. That's legal speak from a case back in 2013 that helped establish some of the precedents for this program, where any project that we fund, there has to be a direct benefit to toll payers. And again, the clearest way that we've been able to demonstrate that and working with the Office of the Attorney General of the state is a project effectively reducing congestion? Is it offering more options to get people off of general purpose travel lanes in the corridor? Alan, I'm not sure if you want to maybe add to that, but we do have a pretty narrow framework.
It is narrow. It is, like Adam said, in the Meeks case, when we refer to that, it is documented there. Also, the MOAs that we have with Commonwealth and with KRT and concessionaires all are built off of the Meeks case. So the Meeks case is setting the precedent. The MOA is built off of that. The program is built off of the MOA. So there are a couple different layers that kind of provide pretty tight guardrails for this program. Now, what we've done when it comes to talking about those benefits that you're talking about, like reduced crashes and those safety opportunities, greenhouse gas emissions, we've taken it on ourselves in our look backs and annual reports to start documenting that. Because those are not in the MOA, they don't feed into the scoring and the criteria. we moved ahead with that because it is a very important element of what this program is helping contribute to safety. It is helping to contribute with climate goals for the region, but it just is not, we're not able to put it into the scoring itself because of that really, really tight window that we have to work with.
Thank you.
Sure.
Quick question, if I can just,
Go right ahead.
continue. Can we talk a little bit more, I just like, about what's happening? I think at first, when the pandemic started, it seemed like people were afraid to ride Metro, they were afraid of transit, so they started driving. Metro still hasn't picked up, the driving is still happening. I mean, are there a lot of people driving that maybe in the past took Metro or are very likely to take Metro, but for some reason still aren't, or the buses? I mean, both, any kind of transit, I guess.
It's a really good question, and I'll credit Alan with this because he said a couple weeks ago that we just forgot how to commute at some point.
Yes, actually, that's how to put it, yes.
The options,
I feel so.
we've put service out there. The options have been there. We are starting to notice a handful of changes. I think one thing that will really help us get a good answer to that question is every 2 years we work with COG to basically perform what we call the cordon count analysis, where we basically take Glebe Road and any transit, whether it's rail, bus, also vehicles that travel into the corridors, and we perform basically counts to go out and look at what is the mode share across the various modes that are available. And the last time that was performed was in late 2021. So of course it was a much different travel picture than was the case 2 years prior in 2019. So we're excited to see kind of what things look like this fall. So at some point this fall, between September and November, those counts will be performed, and we'll have a really good answer on that front about what is the current state of play with commuting in the region.
Really interesting. And as I say, I mean, I wasn't kidding when I said, I mean, today I was just, they're blocking off this road and that road. And it was just, and I said, where are all these people? What are all these people doing here? And you experience that enough, then you'll start to, ride your bike. Great. That's wonderful. Or maybe even take transit. I just, doesn't work for me, but I might try harder to make it work. Some I walked. Go ahead.
We have some initial insights from major metros in the United States. First of all, the peak times are more distributed today, so therefore the flow, which is the congestion benefit, which is the only allowable actually benefit to consider. Everything else the road, the tolled road and the non-tolled part of the road has to be equally safe, and the overall benefit of reducing, because you reduce congestion, theoretically you reduce emissions there, but this accrues to everybody. So the second thing is there is a perception, and it's true that more destination parking is available. Since not everybody is commuting in, more destination parking is available. Therefore, several employers have actually reduced, and they have used and continue to use free parking or subsidized parking to lure people back to office, etc. So there is a lot of, let's put it this way, those who would, help us with managing the commuter flow in the past are now actually doing the opposite. They are, for them, getting people into the office is more important, and therefore they don't care about how they commute into the office. That includes the federal employees.
So you have the total revenues on an annual basis. And the reason I ask is that $40 million is a big number. But if it incorporates carryover from prior years, it's not signaling what we think it's signaling now, a massive increase in, commuting. So do you know what the revenues were year by year so we can see what the actual change is?
Yeah, we do have FY23 actuals at this point. So VITA has provided payment to us for FY23. Part of what makes this a little bit of a tricky exercise is VITA does put together a projection for each fiscal year. So when we talk about the FY25-26 program, that is in the future. We don't know exactly what's going to happen with toll revenues. I think what the $40 million figure represents for us at this point is a relatively safe bet on kind of where things are. VITA's projecting things to be for FY24.
How much did carryover versus what is expected to be generated? Because I know we've been conservative the last couple of years. Very conservative.
So on an annual basis, we have, this is not going to be an exact number, but I'll tell a little bit of the story. It starts at $10 million and escalates to 2.5% every year, started back in 2021, I believe. So we get 10 million from VDOT, escalated 10 million, 2.5% escalated every year. The outside the Beltway concessionaire is 5 million a year, escalated 2.5%. So you basically have 15 million, kind of a, I hate to use the word guarantee, but a pretty solid commitment, though there's at least going to be $30 million for every 2-year project. And then that number grows over time. So that's kind of the big basis. And anything we have in carryover is icing on the cake. And then sometimes we get projects that come in under budget, they wrap up earlier, they end up de-obligating money that goes back into the pot as well. So think roughly 15 and growing every year. So 30 million is your base.
How much money do we have in the bank? How much money have we not spent?
We don't have any, an exact figure. The last program that we funded back in the summer of 2022 was only $15 million at the time. So 2022, right? So that was the last 2-year program that we awarded. So that was only $15 million. So there's, again, a very conservative approach at that point, which again allows us to have a much larger number this time.
I would like to see exactly what is available, not what is, what we're being told we can allocate. But how much money is there?
Okay, sure. All right. Yeah, I know
Funny. This is a funny question. Is it us? I mean, where's it sitting?
it does come here. We do get payments. So what happens is it goes from VDOT to DRP to us, or from the concessionaire to VDOT to DRP to us. But it does end up here at MVTC. So we are sitting on that money. So we do get benefit from the interest that goes off that as well. So the money is constantly there for cash flow purposes and for reimbursing all the different projects. But we can definitely get a little bit more detail of there will be some actuals, and then the out years will always be estimates, because that's what we get. But we can work on something a little more refined by the time we get to the October is when we're going for an action. Yeah, October. Correct.
Can I ask one more question? I'm sorry, just jumping in. So with the VDOT, it goes from concession to VDOT. VDOT sits on the money for a month or two and then sends it to DRP. It goes like in a day, hour. I mean, there's a lot of interest to be earned on some of this money. I'm just curious.
It gets here relatively quick. It's not like, right. It was when we, at the very beginning, it took a little bit longer because we had to put agreements in place, but now it's relatively quickly that it gets here. We're not losing out on
Tons of interest or anything.
We're paid quarterly too. So it's not like there's a whole year that goes by and there's a big lump payment. It's every quarter we get a payment.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Has staff run the change in application timing by any of our applicant jurisdiction to get any feedback on anybody concerned about that change?
No major concerns with it. It's still about the same amount of time for the application window. We're just starting a little bit sooner. So we've actually already started to engage as far back as late April with applicants for the upcoming grant.
And I know we did some point changes to the last program, but that's not being considered here. We're going to stick with the same scoring system.
That becomes the commuter choice sort of.
Okay, so it rolls over.
Right,
okay.
so there's no changes we're making this year to it, so it's the same thing.
Okay.
Looks like Dave has it.
Oh, excuse me. Go ahead, Mr. Schneider.
Yeah, I would just say thanks for the work that NDTC is doing, and preserving that inside the Beltway money obviously is very important for the different types of projects that we can fund with it. So, and then I heard discussion, like technology isn't perfect, but I heard discussion about the commitment from the state because they took some of that money to put it in the Long Bridge project. So preservation of that money and use of that money and different types of projects, oftentimes smaller projects than outside the Beltway, maintaining that diversity of projects and sizes is very important. That would be the only point that I'd make. Thank you.
All right, has everybody asked the questions they have at the moment? All right, well, thank you, Adam, for the presentation and everyone for the discussion. We're going to move on to item 4 on the agenda, which is Xavier Harmony from MVTC with the Transit Resource Center. Give us updates on Envision Route 7 BRT program and an update on phase 4.1 analysis, which focuses on the Falls Church to Seven Corners segment, and an update on the BRT strategic implementation plan. Xavier, the floor is yours.
you. So as you pointed out, there's a lot to discuss. So I'm going to pause partway through these two main pieces, to help with the discussion. But yes, I'm going to give a couple of big updates in the Visionary 7. As an overview, well, to begin, Visionary 7, as a reminder for all, is the bus rapid transit project that goes from Tyson's through to Mark Center in Alexandria via East Falls Church and Falls Church, which we'll be talking about a lot today. It is a project that has gone through a few phases already. Next slide, please. We are going to be discussing first part of phase 4, as well as the strategic implementation plan. Both of these things have been projects we've been working on over the last year. Both of these right now have I have seen draft reports of, and both of my consultant teams are reviewing our comments right now. And we'll talk more about where we are with those particular reports at the end of this. Now let's talk about the actual content right now. Let's start with the Cedar Falls Church Mobility Study. So this is something we've been working on very heavily. This actually started before I started MBTC. So this is a project I've been managing since I started. It's a focus on the mobility aspects of this project, only between I-66 and Seven Corners. It's about 3.5 miles, but still managed to pop over into Arlington for a short little leg to hit the East Falls Church metro station, heading back south into Seven Corners. We used a mix of traffic modeling and public outreach to look at the impacts of both car traffic and bus mobility through this short corridor. And we tested multiple BRT scenarios. We wanted to see different options to sort of see what might work given the constrained nature of this segment of the corridor. I definitely want to emphasize that this study does not make any recommendations. This is a fact-finding mission, and we were trying to find what are the impacts and what is the feedback about these different types of alternatives. This project is not intended to make any recommendations, just so I'm clear. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide might look a little smaller screen, and the text might be a little bit hard to read, but essentially what it shows is there are 4 different scenarios that were analyzed. There was what we call a no-build scenario, which is where we have no additional infrastructure that is built. The BRT is assumed to have a bus with better headways or more buses per hour than what we have right now. But it assumes that no real additional infrastructure or anything else is really built. Then we have 3 different types of scenarios that you can kind of consider a max, min, and somewhere between option for BRT. Scenario 1 is kind of what you could consider the max scenario, where we have the most infrastructure. So what we have here is the red lines in scenario 1, what we call business access transit lanes. They're kind of like red bus lane that vehicles can use to, cars can still use for right turns or accessing businesses. They don't impede those kind of movements, but they are primarily for bus traffic. And then they are also, so that one goes through most of the corridor. Scenario 2 is the most stepped back version, where the only thing in there is what we call queue jumps, a special type of intersection infrastructure that allows buses to get ahead of traffic at some intersections. And then the third scenario is kind of a mix, where we have some of these business access transit lanes or BAT lanes, but only outside of the Route 7 segment. So on Washington Street and Roosevelt Street, for example. And then we have also a queue jump and some other left turn treatments. So these are the 3 different scenarios that the consulting team developed along with jurisdictional staff to get their feedback to sort of see like what BRT might look like in this part of the corridor. Next slide, please. So this picture here gives an overview of what a business access and transit lane might look like. So you can see there is some of that. This is just a SketchUp. This is, you can see the red bus lanes there, but this again is something that allows buses to get ahead of traffic, but doesn't preclude cars from using those lanes for turning or accessing businesses. It doesn't stop business access. It as the name suggests, it's one of those features that we want to make sure is included given the right-of-way constraints and the contextual nature of Falls Church, we wanted to come up with a scenario that was as beneficial as we could make for BRT, while still recognizing limited right-of-way and the nature of our city of Falls Church. So that's what was come up with as a maximum scenario. The next slide, please. So the Q jumps, this is an image showing what a Q jump might look like. So essentially you can see that red bus in that picture there. It comes up to this intersection, sits in like a right turn lane, for example, has a special signal that allows the bus to get ahead of the regular traffic, and kind of gives that bus an opportunity to skip the traffic a little bit. It gets ahead a little bit when it needs to. And then the next slide is an example of some of the other types of treatments. We're talking about left turn pockets where we can move some of the turning traffic out of the way to give more room for through traffic to get through, and gives an opportunity for us to use potentially a bat lane on the right side there on the curb. So those are 3 different types of scenarios that were developed. And again, we use both traffic modeling to evaluate what the impacts are for these different scenarios, as well as a public feedback process. So next slide, we'll talk about some of these results. So like I said, the draft report, I literally provided draft comments to the team yesterday. It was a 70+ page report, so there's a lot of content there. If anyone wants a good, some light reading before bed, it's a hefty document. But I managed to summarize some of the really key results on this one slide. First of all, on the left shows the traffic modeling results. So this is the average change in travel time through the corridor. So the 3 columns of 3 different scenarios, they're looking at average change in corridor travel time is what you're seeing on the y-axis on the left there. And we see bus versus all vehicles. So what's clear in these scenarios is that scenario 1 overall is the best improvement for bus across both AM and PM. But it was also the most impactful to vehicles in both the AM and PM. The second scenario, which was the one that had the least improvements, also has the least benefit, as you might expect. And then the third one, which is somewhere in the middle, lands somewhere in the middle, as you would hope, and gave us confidence in the results because they are what we would expect. So that's what the modeling does. And like I said, it gave us what we expected. Overall, the best result was about a 10% increase in bus speeds in travel time. I mean, bus speeds as well. And then in the PM, cars had the worst outcome with about a 15% decrease, but it was better in the AM. The survey respondents, people were presented each of these different scenarios. They were explained what these scenarios were about, and they were asked in a survey. This survey was presented at public involvement processes. I'll talk about that a little bit in the next slide in a moment. But essentially, we managed to get about 200 responses for the survey, which was not bad, if I'm honest. We were pretty happy with that number. And people were asked, basically, this is the wording, if the proposed scenario had the potential to improve transit service, or moving people efficiently and reliably through the study corridor. Slightly wordy, but we wanted to make sure people really understood what we're getting at with the objectives of this project. And what you're seeing here is a summary of the net agreement. So we actually have 3, it was what we call a like-it scale. So it goes from like strongly disagree to strongly agree. And there's 5 different options. And to try and condense these options for 3 different scenarios into one graph, we did a net agreement, which is where you have all the agrees minus all the disagrees. What is the difference? And this is a way to summarize all the results into one graph. So the net agreement for these results shows that scenario 1 had the highest net agreement. So more people agreeing, take away the people disagreeing. Scenario 2 was in the middle, and scenario 3, which was the compromise kind of scenario, was the least popular. It was, the main reason for this is that the amount of disagreeing was pretty consistent. A lot more people liked the scenario 1, and there just wasn't as much support for scenario 3. So that's kind of like why these results landed where they did. So slightly different messaging, but overall those results. So like I mentioned, we had a few different types of outreach. We had bus chats where we talked to current riders. The 28A for Ramada is the current route that goes through this corridor. So we had people waiting at stops at the 28A stop to talk to them about the project. We had pop-up events, which hopefully would reach people who may not use transit but might in the future. So these were things like farmers markets or things like that. And then we had 2 public meetings, one in October last year and one in May, just a couple of months ago. And like I said, we had a survey that was presented at each of these events, except for the October one, where we presented these options and talked to the community about what we're presenting. So overall, about 60% of respondents agreed that improving bus speeds and reliability was a high priority, which is encouraging. It's a majority. And public comments noted improved transit service would serve as a catalyst for future growth within Falls Church, which again is also encouraging. However, there were some concerns, as you might expect. So some of the concerns mentioned were increased traffic, financial feasibility, possible traffic diversions, and impact to small town feel, especially for Falls Church, and then cyclist safety. So these are things that we take on board as we think about the future phases of this project and how it gets built out. But that's a story for another time. For now, we're going to pause and just see if, since I've just finished the mobility study, we'll take a break here and before I dive into the strategic implementation plan.
Questions? Go ahead, Doug.
Just for my edification, the choice for not putting the lanes in the middle of the street is because there is no width for the stations.
That's right. We try to be really sensitive to the constraint right away. The center running bus lanes would be very beneficial for bus, but they do require more right away, and those are ones that you can't really use the sharing lanes with general traffic. So you can't use them as a dual purpose lane like you can with the curbside runs, which you have here. You will see some center running Fairfax either side of this.
Just wanted to understand. I have to say I have to read to see whether is the entire project anywhere implementing the lanes.
Yeah. So Falls Church, Fairfax will have some aspects. They all have already got some road widening approved, and especially will have that reserved for center running. But it's especially in the US, very normal to have mixed types of running way for BRT corridors. Metroway that crosses from Arlington to Alexandria is a good example where you can be in mixed traffic in one part, center running bus lanes in another part, and curb running bus lanes in another part. And that's a corridor that already operates right now.
No doubt that this is feasible. The question is, does the modeling that the results of which you're presenting here take into account these bottleneck ripple effects that you have a very high service area, then look, you are in a kind of restrained or constrained area, and then you go up. So does this account? So are these travel data that account for the performance of the entire system with this scenario implemented in this segment?
Yeah. So one way to answer that is I mentioned very briefly that one of the concerns was traffic diversions. That is a way that kind of thing is captured because traffic diversions happen from different areas of the corridor depending on where the infrastructure is being built. And where there might be something that's more BRT friendly, there might be more traffic diversions because if you're a driver, you might be saying, well, I don't want to drive through that, so I'm going to go in this other corridor, this adjacent corridor.
Absolutely.
Like that. And so traffic diversions is a way to capture that. And so that is in some ways why traffic wasn't as impacted as you might think in some of these cases, just because some cars are being diverted. And that is definitely accounted for. And if something that has more of a BRT build out is what's finally decided, then those diversion mitigation measures would also need to be considered. But they are included in the modeling.
Diversions, I mean, there is some school of thinking to which actually on occasion I adhere, that says diversion is a good thing because you create preferred corridors, and this is how you reconcile, for example, when you want to have a cyclist place and want to say this is more for you and less for the other type of driver. Are there any diversions that we consider as a benefit rather than a problem?
I feel like that is an answer that is outside of my role in this proposed church. That's more for Mr. Snyder.
Mr. Snyder, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Can you all hear me all right?
Yes,
Now
we
we
can.
Thanks. A couple of comments. First of all, thanks so much to the MVTC staff. They've appeared multiple times and really sought to get public input. I think the operating context in Falls Church City is very different from the operating context for this system in other parts of the entire line. And so I think the kind of flexibility that we're talking about is fundamental. So in our case, it may look like more frequent regular bus service than it does a flashing new BRT line that would take a lane because there isn't the lane to take. So I think ultimate flexibility is what will be the key, and then elbowing out what additional time we can get with things like signal prioritization and some of the other operational elements. But that I think at least some of the community is saying they kind of want as close to current situation on Route 7 Broad Street in the city of Falls Church as we have now. But also a recognition that, you know, there's general as a theoretical matter, support better transit for all the reasons that were mentioned. And so I think finding the right balance is going to be key. And so it's probably going to look more like just more regular bus service again than it does a lane separated BRT with stations and things like that anyway. But I obviously have my own preferences, which would be more ambitious, but I'm not sure that's where the community is at this point, and we're still trying to gather information. Does MVTC staff or any of the commissioners have any comments about that? Staff, what were you kind of bottom line picking up?
So I think that ultimately, as I framed this additional discussion, all we want to do from the staff side is do the fact finding, to gather the information, which we've done. We're going to give you the hard job, Mr. Snyder, of deciding which way to go in the end. When we have the final report, you'll see everything we have in terms of all the feedback from the survey, as well as the nitty gritty of the results that Falls Church staff on their side can dig into more if they would like as well. But essentially, once we have finalized that project, we're going to come to you and your colleagues, Mr. Snyder, and ask you which way you want to go, because we will need that decision to move forward with this project. But I am sorry, we're going to give you the hard part, but that's at least you know it's coming.
I've noticed this many times and never asked. I think it's a simple answer. Why is AM and PM different? It's the same amount of hours. Is it just because in the morning people kind of spread out, and in PM everybody's all at once bunched together? Why is it always, you'd think theoretically?
Yeah. There are multiple answers to that. One of the reasons why it's important here is because the direction of traffic, the flows are very different. And so in one way, a lot of people are heading exactly.
Okay.
And so because the network is very different depending on the direction of traffic you're going, it actually really impacts your delay. But you did actually point out another reason. It is because the actual time concentration for peak hours is different. There can be more of a spread out peak in PM because some people finish at 4 and some people finish at 5 and some people finish at 6. It's a little tighter around the start of the day than an AM peak, but then the also distribution pattern is also very different. So in AM, there's a little more of a focus of cars driving into employment areas. In the PM, everyone's driving home, which is a little more dispersed. Residential areas are more dispersed than employment areas in this area, this region. And so all those reasons are why AM and PM are different and why you see different results. So it's not a simple answer, but there's a lot to it.
Yeah, no, I'm sure there is. I was just kind of curious what all went into it. Okay. Thank you.
You know, I appreciate David's explanation for what people of Falls Church are looking for. My question is, I've been concerned about this from the get-go. doesn't seem like BRT to me. Can we have a successful BRT service from Tyson's to Alexandria if, in the middle, we're running conventional bus service? I mean, where is the example of that and how is it successful?
Yep. So I think one of the best examples of this is actually GITC system in Richmond. They are a really good example of having mixed running way BRT. They are also a statewide example of one of the best transit increases in ridership in the last few years. And they have, they're expanding their BRT system right now. They're working on it. They recently added red bus lanes because they initially had it without red bus lanes. They've just been expanding because the results are so good. But they have a whole variety of different running way, and they're one of the best examples, not just in the state, but in the country. I just particularly knowledgeable about them because Virginia likes talking about them. I used to work for the state, but they're a really good example, and they're a very recent example. Metroway is also a good example of a different way of operations, but it doesn't have the same, the gold standard in the state is GITC, and the Pulse, which is their system. It's just, a lot of people have been paying attention to it because it's a pretty good system, but it's very mixed, adjusting where it needs to.
However, the head weights are, the head weights are not very tight.
Yeah, that's
So Pulse, I love Pulse. I have almost, affection for Pulse. I like how this is implemented. But the head weights are 17, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
This is just a bus that's coming through and it's just nicely put.
Yeah, so even considering it doesn't have the best headways, and I'll actually be riding it again in about 2 weeks myself, because I also like riding the Pulse, and I'll be back in Richmond in a couple of weeks. But from an infrastructure point of view, it's the best example, and even though it can have even better headways, it's still one of the best ridership growth cases in this whole state, even though the headways can be improved, just because the infrastructure has been so effective. And so the city is really taking that and going with it even more. So I definitely get where you're coming from. It definitely doesn't look like what you might be envisioning as BRT in this section. But I think it's really important to consider that this is one section of the whole corridor, and that the corridor itself is more than its individual parts. And I think that's why this is really complemented by the stuff that's happening in Fairfax, as well as joining under some of the great work that's happening in Alexandria as well. It's creating a network of BRT, that it's not just this section of Falls Church, it's part of the whole, and that's what makes this project really useful.
So what is the estimated time during rush hour from Tyson's to Alexandria? And then?
So right now, in the 28A, I actually know this because I actually included a case in this when we presented some work on this the other month. So it varies significantly through the day because of congestion. It can actually vary almost double in time because of the amount of congestion in this corridor. And it can, in the peak hours, be over 70 minutes, 75 minutes, I think it was around there. And it can be, it was actually longer than that. I think it was closer to 90 minutes actually in the peak hour. And it can be as short as around 50 minutes.
So it's going to be 90 minutes plus whatever time you commute to and from home to the.
Yeah, so that's what it is right now. And so we envision that to be a lot faster once you can actually give it some priority. Most time savings won't be in Falls Church, but Falls Church will also benefit from this is a corridor. Each part contributes to the whole. So while you can't perhaps build as much infrastructure in Falls Church, it's still part of this corridor and still can receive some of the benefits and pass those benefits on through other parts of the corridor.
28A is currently 1 hour and 21 minutes.
Yeah.
Tyson's to Mark Center.
1 hour, 21 minutes.
Yeah, the PM peak is also the worst for the 28A.
With the caveat that it also stops way more often than a BRT would stop.
Oh, yeah.
That's one of the reasons.
Just said
Yeah.
the BRT is going to be 1 hour and 30 minutes.
No, that's what it is right in the 28A. We don't have an estimate of what it will be in the future. Sorry, I apologize if I confused you there. It's 90 minutes is what it is right now, 28A. So the 1 hour, 20 minutes is pretty much close to that. We don't have we need to do more study to figure out how much improvement there can be savings for the rest of the corridor. So far, mobility part's been broken up into phases. We've done the part that's north of 66, and Fairfax County has started to advance the design work there. This is the second phase of this project. Then there's one more phase which covers 7 corners down to Alexandria. That's the last mobility phase. And once we get that, then we have a better understanding, and especially once we've chosen what the alternatives will be, what the whole corridor time savings will be. So if you talk about like maybe a 5% saving in Falls Church, but then larger savings elsewhere, you can definitely see much larger changes, and those changes, time savings, won't be consistent through the day because of where congestion happens.
Is your planning constrained by the funding you think will be available? Just plan the best system you can plan and then hope to get it funded?
Right now, our funding is primarily driven by community feedback and modeling. So what is the traffic analysis saying, and what is the public appetite for what is going to be most suitable for each part of the corridor? The funding is an important piece, but it's not something that's driving the design work.
So in my past, I participated in planning a very similar situation. It was not meant to be a BRT, but it was called an express bus service. So it had the same issue. It went through from a modern city into a old village that had a constrained right of way. So the solution that we chose was the thoroughfare through the village, so Falls Church in that case, the small city, was regulated with the smart signaling. That means that in peak times, we would actually actively reserve a lane. We would have these signs on top of that.
Yep.
In arrows, reserve the lane. That would be inconvenient for cars at that moment, but we wouldn't have to build any extra infrastructure because for the reasons that you mentioned. And the rationale was there was a headway moment, a headway service that we have been targeting. It was 5 minutes, very frequent one, where we said, yeah, well, below 12 or so minutes, it begins to degrade the performance of the entire system. Therefore, we will switch, the go-through lanes, the bus go-through lanes. So is that something that we could think in addition to the scenario that we showed?
So I've seen those switching direction lanes in different parts. There's some really good BRT systems in South America, especially, that have really heavily used those. They are kind of tricky to build out in a lot of areas, especially in a constrained right of way because of the switching lanes and everything. And they can be confusing for drivers sometimes. So some people,
It's around.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on 4 Mile Run, there's one if you want to see.
But it's not one that's been considered here. It could be considered for future phase of the project, but it's definitely worth keeping in mind.
This is a service preservation measure. That means, if in doubt, if against the ropes, we opt for public transit to be the preferred model, and that's the.
So, any further questions? Or are we good to?
Yeah, I didn't hear, I'm sorry, I had to step out really quick, but so I didn't hear all of Mr. Cantonis' point, but the only thing I was curious about is in future reports and modeling, we got that great study about the operating costs, and 28A was the most expensive.
Yep.
And I'm curious how, as you do start to, tie this together and get further down, are we going to see those things brought together? We know it's expensive. We know it's expensive because of congestion. How will this both improve congestion but bring down costs on the 28A?
Yeah, so I think once we finish that final mobility piece, I think that'll be a very easy thing to connect, because we can say, okay, with X amount of time savings, especially in peak hour, we can compare to peak hour, time differences, equate that to what your operating cost is throughout the time and see what it changes and extrapolate that through a year. I think that's a relatively easy thing to do once that final piece is done.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. So the second part, the strategic implementation plan. This is a little bigger picture. So this is looking about how we get from where we are now to the end of this project. So there are 4 key questions that we ask through this strategic implementation plan. Who's best suited to lead the design and construction of the project? Who has the capacity and ability to be the operator? What's the best scenario for ownership and maintenance of the stations and right-of-way? And then how might the lead agency advance the project to ensure its timely and successful completion? So next slide, please. We had several organizations involved in this study, in this project. So we had all the jurisdictions that are touched by this project, including the City of Fairfax, County of Fairfax, I was looking at City of Falls Church. County of Fairfax, City of Falls Church, City of Alexandria, and Arlington County. We also had Metro and DFT involved. And they've been coordinating with FTA throughout as well, because they're an important player of this project. Next slide, please. So the major tasks are split into three main themes: implementation, service operations, and right-of-way and station ownership maintenance. I won't go deep into the detail with each of the different aspects here, but this graphic here just gives you an idea of some of the things that are captured under each of these three key decisions that were being discussed in this project. Next slide, please. So the slides I just covered, you saw a couple of months ago. This is the new stuff. Talking about funding is very timely. One of the outcomes of this project is where does funding come from and when does it come from different places. So there are four main phases of work that are coming up. There's NEPA, which is the environmental work. There's final design, or all design work really, construction, and operations. There are different types of funding sources for each of these, depending on the type of project phase, from different sources: federal, regional, state, local. And this is and some of these funding pots are contingent on the final decisions that are made. So one thing that we haven't decided, we haven't come to a conclusion yet, and we haven't needed to yet, is deciding who the operator will be. That is something that doesn't need to be made right now and can be held off right now. But who the operator will finally be does affect what kind of funding you can use in the future. So, for example, WMATA, Metro, is not eligible for the merit funding from DFT. Metro gets its funding from the state in its dedicated funding source, and so it is not eligible for the merit funding that an alternative operator might be eligible for. So that is why you see asterisks over here. But there's a variety of funding pots overall that are being considered for different phases of work that can benefit the project. And each of these different pots of money gets set up in different times. So when you have to be ready to apply the different pots of money, we have all figured out as well, which brings me to the next slide. This is, again, a lot of detail. This is just to give you an overview of the amount of work that's gone into this implementation project. So one of the key outcomes for us is like, what is the step-by-step task for MPTC and the jurisdictions in getting this project underway?
You're talking the entire project.
The entire project now, yes. Yeah, so this is taking the first part of the presentation was Just Falls Church. This is the entire thing now. Everyone's involved. This is how we get there with everyone involved. So there's some immediate steps. The big takeaway is that there's some immediate steps for MPTC to take, but as you step out with the project phases, MPTC takes less of a lead role and more of a supporting role. That's why you see the responsibility. You don't see MPTC's name as much. You start seeing implementation lead. We've had some preliminary discussions about who that will be, but we still need to talk to the jurisdictions one-on-one, or the affected jurisdictions one-on-one, to actually make some final arrangements and agreements about what direction we'll be taking, especially because there's been a lot of change with leadership with all the jurisdictions affected, really. And so it's a good thing to keep these conversations going. And so we're going to have these discussions to make sure everyone's on board before we make any final decisions. But the big point is MPTC will start stepping back as the major lead in a lot of these things, and the implementation lead will start taking over. It'll be one of the jurisdictions who most likely.
Us.
Yeah,
Us.
one of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Making sure I understand what,
Yeah.
this is why we're here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So but I will, again, there's a lot of material here that I'm not gonna, tell you what's all on this action table right here. I'm not gonna read everything here. This is just to give you an idea of all these steps that are involved in this process. And I actually took a few out to make this a little bit easier to read. There's so many things that you need to be doing here in terms of getting the right government planning processes, applying for funding at certain times, thinking about, we talked about earlier about funding years 2 years out, well, smart scale is several years out as well. So you've got to be thinking about years in the future when you're going to need this money and how to prepare for it. So there's a lot of steps that need to be considered throughout this process. We've worked with our consultants who have been a great team to help figure out what all these steps are and who needs to be taking it over when. So we have about a 10-year outline of what needs to be done over those years. We are not using hard years though, because there is so much still that could change. A lot of this is contingent on, do we get the right amount of money when kind of things. I mean, there are good funding programs like Smart Scale, but you're never guaranteed to get funds. And so there's so much contingent on different steps along the way that it's still a little premature to be exactly like, this is where it's going to be built out. This is a guideline, especially in this stage. But we have a much stronger idea about what is needed when moving forward, and a much better game plan for getting us to actual operations of this corridor from Fairfax all the way through to Alexandria. So then one more slide. As an overview of where we are, and this is kind of catch everything, the big milestones for this project in the summer, we are wrapping up the mobility study. So like I said, we had the report that's being reviewed right now. We are going to bring this to commission for, what was the term? Acceptance. In September, so just acceptance, like this is the stuff you found, you accept it. And then we're going to work with Falls Church in the fall to determine the preferred alternative. So that's when Commissioner Snyder has to make that hard decision. We also will be, as I mentioned, going to talk to each of the jurisdictions about the final decisions about the strategic implementation plan over this coming fall. And then to be determined, but hopefully later this fall, we'll come to the commission and ask for acceptance of the strategic implementation plan as well as some of the stuff we discussed now. And then moving forward in the fall and winter, we'll finalize and put out the RFP for the remaining planning and environmental works, the NEPA stuff. We've already talked about how we've gotten some federal funding for that to support us, which is good, and we're working on the scope right now, but we want to make sure our ducks in a row and the other stuff is taken care of before then. And then, as I said before, we have ongoing FTA engagement to make sure they're on board and they're aware of what we're doing, because they're an important stakeholder in this project, especially as we go through the environmental stage. So that is it for the Envision Route 7 stuff. Are there any questions about the project as a whole or the strategic implementation plan?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so obviously activity going on the Falls Church piece. And I know in Fairfax from Spring Hill to Falls Church, basically, good activity. We amended our comprehensive plan yesterday, I think, to incorporate all this stuff. I never heard anything about from Falls Church to Alexandria, any activity. Is anything being done there? And if so, what?
Yeah, so when I guess my notes were a little brief. When I talk about the environmental stage in this next page, the NEPA stuff, coupled with that is that final planning work that includes that part from Seven Corners down to Alexandria. That last piece, which you're very accurately acknowledged has not been discussed as much, is included in this last piece of work. So the RFP that we're putting together now includes the environmental piece. It also includes that stuff. I think we're still discussing whether to have that as one package of work or whether it's split up as two different things. But because this is a lot more work than we've had before, that's partly why we've been getting recruiting a new senior program manager, because this is a lot more work in concurrent work than we've ever had for this project.
I think you guys are inundated with work. I mean, you guys. But so do we need more workers? Can we does everything have to be done sequentially? Because I've been for the last, I don't know, 6 or 8 years. I end every meeting with, where's the schedule? And now I got a schedule and I'm like, oh shit.
So on that front, we are Some of the stuff does have to happen sequentially. There is a bandwidth of funding and staff time. As Xavier mentioned, we are actively recruiting to actually bring somebody on full-time to take on this. So, and be the face of the initial resettlement project going forward. That way, someone's completely dedicated to it.
What I was thinking is, you know, how we moved the Fairfax piece from Tyson's to Falls Church. Couldn't we be moving the Fairfax Alexandria piece? Because we're going to be running BRT in Fairfax when that's done. It's not going to run. It's going to run to Falls Church.
Are you going to
and then turn around and go back?
Correct. I think you're getting a little bit of the phasing, which is an option, but like we talked about, I'll use the City of Falls Church segment as an example. We have those scenarios that we put all the data for. The conversation we're having this fall is the City of Falls Church, City Council, and their community are going to have an input process that where it's like, what do they want to do? We can't do NEPA until we narrow it down. Same thing with the segment of.
Okay. So you have a sense of urgency. It's just that.
Yeah, it's like, because you don't want to do NEPA on everything because you want NEPA to be as narrow as possible. That way you focus your resources and get it done quicker. Because if you have NEPA that's this wide and you're looking at the impacts here because you haven't whittled it down to what you want to do, it costs more money, takes more time. The Falls Church thing, when they get to the point of like, this is exactly what we want to do through their corridor, when we write a NEPA document, way easier to do. You know what your impacts are. It's much easier to categorize that. So it is a slow process, but they are building off of each other. We try to find ways to accelerate things wherever we can.
That is to say there aren't other efficiencies in here. So like when I showed the potential funding sources and the 4 main projects, these phases aren't necessarily sequential. So design work will start while NEPA is still happening. That's normal when these things happen. And construction will normally start before final design is finished, because final design can sometimes be informed by some of the construction work. So there is some overlap between these phases that kind of shortens up the process a little bit. So when you see like the environmental design, construction, those things aren't necessarily, you don't finish NEPA and then start design. There's overlap there. There's just not really represented on these slides.
Thanks.
So pulling back a little more big picture. So one of the things I'm always coming up with, you say the same thing, Isaac, but what about that Metroway and then down to Amazon into Arlington? How come it stops there? And I'm assuming there'd be an overall plan to make a real system that isn't just this line. This would be part of this bigger system that's actually already partially built. Could this system actually run on the Metroway? That's one question. And then I'd like to get into who's running it. So why don't we start out with the system? I mean, I assume there's an overall system that we're kind of getting to.
We don't have a regional BRT map in here. Maybe something we'll have to add in there.
Yes, I would feel so much better. I would feel so much better if I saw that each time.
We actually have that. We can share that with you after this. So you can kind of see how they all start.
No, and I'm sure that's, I just keep, because I never see it. I said, they're thinking about this, aren't they? But we never see it.
Yeah.
So
this one directly comes down and touches BRT in Alexandria. It doesn't touch Metroway, but other BRT does, because the different corridors intersect at different points.
Yes, but we got to make it so it.
They do touch. They all touch.
Yes, exactly.
And our map shows that. It's better described as a higher capacity transit map because it's BRT and Metro.
Okay.
And the network looks incomplete if you have just BRT, and incomplete if you just have the Metro.
And that totally makes sense, because as I think it was John was saying, it isn't really BRT. It really is sort of.
As for the operator, there are a couple of contenders, but because the decision doesn't have to be right now, and there's a couple of contenders who are still interested in running it, we are gonna put a pin on that conversation until they have a better idea what they.
I'd like to know what the parameters are. In other words, are we talking as contenders? Are we talking Alexandria, Falls Church, and Fairfax? Are we talking some other group? Are we talking Metro, which I don't think we want to do because Metro's got plenty of problems.
I will say the contenders are all that you should know, but I don't know how. Yeah, okay. So essentially, it's Fairfax Connector or WMATA are the main ones right now.
Yeah, okay. Fairfax Connector or WMATA. Okay, good. WMATA out. Fairfax. Okay, good. That makes sense. And
they're both eager about it.
Come up with some kind of agreement and work things out.
That's the easy stuff, right?
No, but I think it probably makes sense. And those, I realize you don't have to decide yet, but
Yeah.
stations probably, I mean, I'm sure they're happening at a staff level, but
I think there's two different scenarios that could happen there. If you go with Metro Bus, we have the structure in place, the governance structure, lowercase g governance structure in place to have Metro run it. If Fairfax Connector decides they want to do that, and we come to an agreement with the City of Falls Church, Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax Connector, there would be some legal agreements that would have to be put into place for them to operate into the other jurisdictions, which kind of gets a little bit,
Yeah, we
one of the.
no, I get, yes.
Detail, yeah, so, but that's kind of where we stand. A lot of thought has gone into what those need to look like, because it's not just operations, it's who's maintaining things, who's maintaining, who owns the buses and
Yeah.
all of that.
Yeah.
And where, which is why Fairfax makes sense. A lot of grant out there. Okay, I mean, I just think, when you're looking at labor, all the problems that Metro and Lamont, I mean, it's just, it would be nuts to go, and I don't think they'd want, I mean, they're just a whole kind of thing that we don't have to worry about, because we're just Virginia, right? That's what we're, right now?
Yeah.
Then we're going to DC and out to Maryland, and we'll do that one day, but that's a different thing.
Yeah. And they currently operate 20A. They are still interested in running this when it's full BRT. But fortunately, this is something we can put a pin in right now, because they have bigger questions that they need to answer right now, and we don't have to answer this one right now. The infrastructure, the operation decisions are a little bit different to the infrastructure decisions. There is some discussion that needs to happen between those, but not right now.
Yeah.
So we're okay right now, but there are advantages and disadvantages to both.
Yeah, but yes.
Mr. Snyder, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do. First, a couple comments. My comments a few minutes ago were not intended to suggest there isn't enthusiasm or support for the project, but rather to try to be realistic about the operating conditions and context, that it will have to differ based upon different parts of the line. And in fact, the part up Washington Street, 29, may actually resemble more like a traditional BRT. Because the configuration of the highway, the movements of traffic, pedestrians, bicycles are very different in different parts. So it's just to illustrate that. I would suggest that where the timeline, which is of course very long, I'd suggest instead of proposed timeline, possible timeline. I think we'd like a quicker timeline if possible. And I think we'll collectively work with the other jurisdictions involved to get this done much more rapidly, but we know there are lots of contingencies. So I would suggest that's not a proposed timeline, it's a possible timeline, and we'd like to be more ambitious. So those are a couple points, but I don't want to imply that there's not support for this. In fact, there's a lot of support for it from the standpoint of regional standpoint as well as local. I'm just trying to be realistic about the operating context and environment for this. And other than that, in terms of who operates it, we haven't had any discussion of that locally, but if the Fairfax bus system wants to operate it, I think we'd probably be very comfortable with that, or Metro, or whoever can do it most efficiently and effectively. I just wanted to make those points. And again, thanks for all the focus. And believe me, I want this project to go. And I think the majority of our citizens want it to go. But I also want to make sure that we're addressing the uniqueness, not only in the City of Falls Church, but unique characteristics throughout this line. So we may be writing transit history here, but I think it's really exciting if we do it right. So thanks.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, Alexandria, it just had a lengthy hearing, some of you might have heard a bit about, on our proposed BRT on Duke Street. And we broke even that up into segments, which we're treating differently with center running and side running. So I appreciate very much sort of the real estate challenges and other geographic challenges that Mr. Snyder is referencing. I'm just curious, I know we're not at price yet and we're not being dictated by price, but are we thinking about the fact that under this timeline, we'd hopefully be in an electric fleet or our fleet would look different and thus our potential for charging infrastructure along the route, opportunities for road-based charging or catenary charging?
That was all brought up in the strategic implementation plan discussions. I will say, while it's not really the focus of the discussion, I think the pretty strong consensus among staff is that, by the time this gets built, 10 years from now, diesel buses aren't really going to be a thing. And so there might not even be a choice because diesel buses just might not be something you can buy anymore. This is just the reality of things. Whether it's like electric or hydrogen, I think, that's a discussion that's happening in the transport world right now. And there's a lot of thoughts about that. So that could affect things like charging, and that's why some of that's out of scope of the discussion right now. But I think pretty broadly, everyone just assumes there won't be diesel buses or maybe even CNG buses that could even run this in 10 years from now. So I think to put it simply, it's definitely going to be that. It's just we don't know quite what it looks like, and so we'll think about that a little bit longer.
I think there's a lot also we're doing a lot of work right now with the MVTC's zero emission strategic plan, which is building a lot of really good foundational knowledge and figuring out where folks are going, where's the industry going, where's Northern Virginia going, where's the region going, will help inform all this stuff. As Xavier said, down the road, whatever path NVTC district decides to go will definitely play into the form where this is.
Dave, this is sort of building on things you said, talking about the public appetite, and what you have to do. But the public appetite changes really rapidly. So it could be by that, we're trying now this is a long timeline, as you said. It seems to me it could be easily in another 4 years. The appetite is, so as you'll probably refine some of the designs as maybe the appetite gets to be for, willing to accept some other things and realizing they might like those trade-offs. Yeah.
And to build on some comments I made earlier about GRTC found that to be the case. And actually, so like I said, they didn't start with red bus lanes, but they added them after the project started. So there are some things you can do to improve the project after it's been built, after it's been opened, after people have seen the benefits of it. So just because Falls Church, whatever decisions they go, if they don't decide to go with red bus lanes now, that doesn't preclude them from having them in the future. Just like GRTC decided later on that they decided that's something they wanted. GRTC also is expanding it because they found it so successful. So, definitely appetites do change, moods do change, and people might find that, in a few years, oh, actually, I wouldn't mind some more of that BRT in my jurisdiction. So,
well, it's one of the real advantages of BRT other than fixed rail. Like we're doing the whole streetcar thing. You get putting down rail, you can't. But this is really adaptable, which this day and age is great. Thank you. All right. Thanks.
If I could make one more point, that the point about really exciting new technology, and we ought to start maybe providing some examples of that in our in the graphics. I think that point is a very good point. People would be very interested in if this looks like this is really something very different from the kind of buses that we see today. Anyway, I think there's a positive factor that goes beyond just that this is the type of vehicle. I think it will help get public interest.
Okay, well, thank you for the presentation, Xavier, and the discussion and questions. Does anyone have any other business to bring up before the committee today?
Just a big thank you. And thanks for entertaining all the kind of strange questions. Sometimes I appreciate it. Thank you.
Alan, do you have any other comments today?
So yeah, Madam Chair, staff is working on the agenda for the remaining commission and committee meetings for the rest of the year. We'll see you all again in September, and then we have 4 more commission meetings. We have a lot of committee meetings yet to come. We are starting to figure out a time frame potentially for the next program advisory committee meeting. We're looking at, I think, mid-September, so stay tuned for a little bit of communication about that. That one is going to be focused on our zero emission bus strategic plan. Ann McGrain, our senior program manager who's leading that, has a lot of great information about what we've learned from the industry, where things have gone, how they've evolved quickly over the last couple of years as technology has evolved very fast. what we're hearing from folks regionally, both in the greater DC region here in Northern Virginia, and then also some discussion about what is MVTC's roles going forward as this from a regional point of view. So we'll be in touch very soon about dates and times for that. But that one is going to be dedicated to zero emission bus. So a nice little segue from the question earlier. So lots more to come. That's all.
All right. Well, no other comments or questions? We are adjourned.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thanks.
All right, interesting.
Trustee Arlingtonian, I left this sitting on my bike
Oh,
outside, like